Congratulations, you're all innovators doing cutting edge things like meeting on virtual roundtables that we've never done before. But I'm delighted to have you all here. I will take up less airtime. My name's Rick Parsons. I'm the principal of Sterling Hall. This is my 9th year. I'm a product of all boys education. I have only two brothers and no sisters, and I have 2 sons and no daughters. So I'm perhaps situated well for that. My youngest son graduated from Sterling Hall. He is in 2nd year at U of T right now, and my older son graduated from U of T and is doing his master's at Oxford. So he's away. But we're here today to welcome you and maybe share a little information about what's going on with the school. We have an amazing panel for you. Sidney Wambua is going to speak to you. He's an alumnus of Sterling Hall, the class of 2019. He's currently a boarding student at St. Andrew's College, another boys' school just north of the city, an amazing school. And he'll have some things to share with you. Beth Ann Jones is the past president of the Parents Association of Sterling Hall from last year, but also I'm thinking, Beth Ann, you've been at the school for 5 years with your kids, is that right? Yeah. And we've got Jack, who graduated last year, is now grade 9 at Upper Canada College, was our head boy. Sam is in grade 7, Will is in grade 5. And Beth Ann, like Sydney, is multi-talented and we'll have lots of perspectives to share. And lastly, but not least, we have Nicole Dominguez, who's should be hopefully joining us and has 2 boys in the school. And I think Nicole's been here 5 years as well, with Gabriel in grade 3 and Lucas in grade 2. And Nicole is currently our president of the Parents Association, was vice president with Beth Ann last year. And Nicole has also navigated this pandemic in this PA role, and so has lots of insight into in the new normal. And I'm delighted that all 3 of them could be here. I'm also, so that's a welcome to our panel. And our moderator, of course, is Susie Heinrich, who is our Director of Enrollment Management. I think it's quite an appropriate panel for Sterling Hall because people will hear me espouse all the time. Our 3 core values are Sterling learning, Sterling character, and Sterling community. And this is, in my opinion, a great reflection of our community. We really believe deeply in our partnership with families. I believe that alignment is so important, both as a father and as an educator, because ultimately we all want the same thing for your boys. We want them to grow and learn, and no one knows the boys better than parents. And so the more connection we can have with families and learn about how to motivate and inspire each boy, that to me is gold. And so I love the partnership we have with our families and our community. And I think that they have a lot to share and say about the school and how that works and in what ways. So I think that's great. The other thing is I'll share other 2 core values. One is Sterling learning. Certainly there's lots of elements to our program we won't get into right now. But I wanted to say something close to my heart, which is the last one, Sterling character. For me, I came to Sterling Hall 9 years ago, coming from University of Toronto schools, where I was vice principal there for 8 years. And for those who don't know, that's a school that's highly academic. And so for me, academics is just a natural course of programming for children. We're going to have excellent program here. But what do we do and how do we execute those programs in many ways shows our true mettle and our character. And to me, that's what we need to focus on in the elementary years on top of the learning. We need only look around at the leadership in the world to realize there's a deficit there that we're really hoping we're going to develop some boys to lead and take over and maybe leave the world in a little better place than we've left it to this point. However, I'm actually an optimist, despite what I just said. And I do believe that we can formulate incredible learning for children, both in the realm of academics and in character. Something that I'll briefly speak about is we do have a program at Sterling Hall that is driven by positive psychology in terms of developing character. To me, it's about trying to understand what makes us strong. And that's where positive psychology focuses, rather than what's wrong with us, which is traditional psychology, where we look at pathologies and problems. And one area that we do that in is something called VIA character strengths, the values in action research that's come out of University of Pennsylvania in the early 2000s. And so that's a driver of a lot of our program. It's purposeful, it's theoretical, and it's bound in lots of research. And I think that is something that stands us apart, I think, from other schools. Sydney, one thing that we have now that we didn't have when you were here, we didn't put the VIA character strengths reflections on your report card, did we?
I don't think so.
No. So we've developed, since you left for that, in the last 2 years, we've been kind of working a little bit on that. So the first page of every boy's report card talks about a self-reflection on their character and the VIA character strengths that we that are ubiquitous across our school.
Actually, I believe I did that, actually, now that I'm thinking.
I think we piloted something with you, but we have it more formal. Yeah. At any rate, so why don't I let the panel speak a little more competently about these things, and I'll just say welcome. Thank you so much for coming. There's lots of other opportunities to check in with us through the year if you would like to learn more, but without further ado, I'll pass it over. So thank you, Susie, for letting me do an introduction.
Thank you, Rick. And welcome, everybody. It is so great to see you all here. Thank you for taking the time this Wednesday morning to be with us, and thank you to our panelists. We're really excited to have you share your perspectives with us. So basically, the way this format is we're going to ask our parents to answer some questions, and then we're going to speak with Sydney as well. And as we're going through this, if you have some questions, please feel free to add them to the chat at any point. And then we'll have some time at the end to go through your questions. So please, write those away at any point so you don't forget them. So we're going to start with our parents, and I'll ask them the same question, and then they can take turns answering it. So are we ready? Here we go. So first, why did you choose Sterling to start with? And in what ways is it what you expected? And in what ways wasn't it what you expected? So maybe Beth Ann, why don't you take it away to start with?
Well, thanks so much for having me on the panel. I wanted to start by telling you that Sterling has been such an amazing gift for me and my family, my boys in particular. I've just seen them grow into be the best versions of themselves, and having this opportunity to share that with prospective parents means so much to me. I will tell you that when we were looking at schools many years ago for our boys, we'd originally only came to the process because we had one boy in particular that we were looking at schools for. And then when we stepped foot into Sterling Hall, we thought, how can we not give this experience to all of our boys? And we quite readily applied for all of them, kept our fingers crossed, and were ecstatic that they were all accepted. And what were the motivators for us to make that decision were the boy-centric learning environment, not only just the physical environment, the attention to the detail in the chairs and the furniture, the placement of the board, the smart boards, the room setup, the dynamics of that, all of the attention to how boys best learn. There was thought behind it. It wasn't just haphazardly put together. You could tell that there was a lot of research invested into it, as well as teachers spending time to ensure that it was executed properly. So that I loved. I loved that there was a lot of thought put into every decision placed into just the physical environment, because if you have boys, which you all do because you're here, you know that physical and boys hand in hand, right? So there is that. And then I loved the philosophy of the school. Of course, the academics are there. Any of these schools that I was looking at or touring, the academics, they're right there. They're all there, of course. Once we got that out of the way, I wanted to know, well, what else are my boys going to be surrounded by? They're going to be somewhere all day without me and without their father, without all that we value. They're going to be with other people. So what are they going to be learning other than the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s? And when I started to learn more about the values that Sterling holds, that was really what drove it for me. The other key thing that I love and that I think really makes Sterling unique is that it only goes to grade 8. So then there are those critical learning years, those foundation years where your boy is going to go through so much change and development. Emotionally, they're going to become different people. They're going to find new likes, new passions, and Sterling's going to help uncover those and unearth them and help those boys come into the best versions of themselves, which really I saw happen with my sons. And then when they find those little nuggets, they're going to polish them off. What Rick was talking at the very beginning, that positive psychology. So when you find something that your son is good at, they're going to nurture that and they're going to water that. And then that flower is going to blossom. And it's not going to be a focus on what they're not good at. And in doing so, they create this environment where it's safe to be vulnerable and it's safe to try things. And with that becomes failure. And you can have a total flop, because that's what learning is. Learning's having total flops. Learning isn't always hitting the level 4s or the A+. Learning is flopping and failing. And that's a word that sometimes we don't like to use. And they can be personal failures and they can be academic failures. But the best part about failing is being in a safe environment in which you can grow from that and learn from that and mature from that and become better. And I loved that Sterling saw all of those areas as opportunities for growth and to do that in a safe environment. And I've seen my boys become better people for it. And has Sterling, what was the second part of your question? Did it exceed? Sorry, Susie, I got on a tangent. Did you say exceed?
What ways did it not meet your expectations?
Oh, it exceeded all my expectations. Like there was nothing that it didn't meet. If anything, I felt that there was one area where it far exceeded my expectations, and that was the community, where I felt that the parents were able to connect and I felt like I belonged. I found a place where my children belonged, and I knew that they felt safe and wonderful and they loved going to school. But then it exceeded my expectations in that I felt like I had a place where I belonged as well. So I know that the slogan is where boys belong, but I really think it should be where families belong, because this is a commitment, right? It's a financial commitment, it's a time commitment, not just the driving back and forth, but you're all in, right? So if you don't feel that you belong and you don't feel like your family belongs, you're not going to be able to make that commitment wholeheartedly. And I felt like we belonged as a family. So maybe we could change the slogan.
Well, thank you. So Nicole, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think Beth Ann covered quite a bit. Thank you everyone for being here. And I too am honored to be part of this round table. Rick, thank you for that introduction. I guess what I would layer on to that, the main reason that we came to Sterling Hall was really the warm and welcoming environment. And I say that because when I applied to Sterling Hall, I was bringing a JK and SK package. And at the time, my youngest was 3 years old. I think he was probably 2.5 when he did the assessment. So I really felt like I needed an environment that was going to be warm and welcoming. And I definitely found that at Sterling Hall. We felt it the minute we stepped foot into the building at the open house. It's unfortunate that we can't do that this year, but just meeting all the parents, volunteers that were there and so welcoming, meeting the admissions office who literally embraced me. I knew this was the sort of environment I wanted to bring my young boys into. So that was definitely an important point for us. Beth Ann touched on this, but I'll expand a little further. For us, it was very important to have a K-8 school. Bringing young boys, we felt that we really needed an environment and a school that focused on those formative years and building the boy from K-8. So that was another driver for us to come to Sterling. And, you know, truthfully, Sterling really didn't disappoint. Between the community, the boys, the parents, and the faculty and staff, people are friendly, everyone's engaged and welcoming. And this school really knows what it's doing with boys in those formative years, so we've felt very comfortable. The last part of that question is, how was Sterling not what I expected? I'd say this is more of an assumption that I think my husband and I made going into an all-boys school. I think we both grew up in co-ed environments, and so we kind of hummed and hawed, you know, how is this real world? How will our boys, you know, work in an all-boys environment? And I think that was a slight hesitation we had. And I can say with confidence now into our 4th year that Sterling Hall really is a place where boys belong. I think they understand boys' physical and mental needs. You'll hear my young sons talking about 4 recesses per day. And the fact that the school really understands how boys learn is just so amazing. So I'd say I have no concerns and no worries about what may have been an initial assumption of mine coming into the school. I can say with confidence that Sterling really knows how to handle young boys.
All right. Well, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on. What's the
Hey, Susie,
biggest...
sorry,
Yeah.
before we jump into the next one, can I just add some color to something?
Sure.
Okay, I noted, Nicole, when you say that we have 4 recesses per day, I just wanted to explain that for a second, which is, this is what we call pandemic timetable. So given the nature of the pandemic, we know that we want boys to be up and moving, that Beth Ann talked about the physicality, that we normally have beanbag chairs for nesting areas. We have stand-up desks that boys can move to during the academic learning during the day. And because we have them 2 meters apart, isolated during the pandemic, we have a timetable that has them getting up out of their seats and getting outside every 60 to 90 minutes. So that means that every boy has 4 30-minute recesses during the day. Before you imagine that you're sending your son to a camp that was spending 2 hours outside, there's actually a purpose behind it all. And so I just wanted to share that element.
Thank you for the clarification, Rick. Okay, so what is the biggest impact the school has had on your child? And why don't we start with you, Nicole, this time?
Yeah, thanks, Susie. I think because Sterling places such a significant emphasis on character development starting right into JK, I would say that something really wonderful that I've seen in the boys is their understanding of character strengths, but not just their ability to explain them. Sterling really emphasized putting those character strengths into practice. Rick talked a little bit about our Sterling Star program and how boys are acknowledged for their efforts, whether it's kindness, love of learning. There's all sorts of character strengths that the school really encourages. So I'd say that the ability for my boys to understand those and put them into practice has been of great value. Another important point that I think Sterling does a wonderful job of is the social emotional learning program. I'm very impressed in the way that Sterling is teaching my boys how to be compassionate, empathetic, and civic-minded individuals. So I would say that's another wonderful growth I've seen in my 2 young boys. And I'd say finally, the confidence I've seen in my boys is another very important item. I think there's been a lot of learning opportunities and leadership opportunities for the boys, and that's built their confidence. So things like being able to run for student council, speaking and presenting in large assemblies at such a young age. I'm pretty sure my son in SK was able to get up there and do a presentation. And as a parent of young boys, I thought, wow, these are opportunities that I don't know you can get in every learning environment, but because Sterling focuses on those K to 8 years, here we are with boys in kindergarten presenting in front of 300 plus people. So for me, having the boys step out of their comfort zones and explore has been just such a gift. And I think that's all for me.
Yeah, thank you. Beth Ann, do you want to add on to that?
Well, not to piggyback onto Nicole's answers, but those are very similar things that we see in our own home. I would echo the civic mindedness of our boys, and that's a direct relationship to school, via character strengths. It's one thing to talk about them. It's one thing to talk about being empathetic. It's one thing to talk about having curiosity and love for learning. It's another thing to actually implement those and actually act. And just to see them in action is quite remarkable. And it's something else when you can sit down with your 3rd grader or 4th grader and have a conversation about something that's happening in the real world and see them answer that call to action and see them say and hear them say, I can make a difference and this is how I can do it. And knowing that they're at this school where that's encouraged and it's passionate and they're around like-minded people, to me that's exciting. And it goes back to the academics. We're going to get that anywhere, but would they be around like-minded people like that who are encouraging them to see their privilege and to use their privilege for better? And that I think is really special. And as well as they're very much aware of their role in in the school and having those leadership opportunities and being able to exercise those. We were also concerned, Nicole touched on it, having the all-boy environment. Only having sons, I have 3 boys, and not having any girls in the home, it was something that I was a little unsure of. And like Nicole, like, how accurate is this as a reflection of the real world? There are women out there. You're going to eventually leave Sterling Hall and you're going to have to work with them. And I would say that something else that I love about Sterling is their awareness of ensuring that the boys know how to work in teams of all kinds and be inclusive, and their awareness of diversity and how they, what's the best word? I bring that in through all levels of the school. So not just in their classroom, but in their play as well. And it's wonderful to see the boys have strong female leadership in the school. That was very important to me. But the biggest impact, I would say, is confidence. And I would say the example I always use is that we brought our son Jack in grade 5. He was extremely shy, barely spoke. His previous school, they asked us if there was anything wrong with him because he never talked. And after 3 months at Sterling Hall, we hosted an anniversary party for my parents. And I stood up, I gave a toast for my parents, I sat down, and this was in front of 100 people, and Jack on his own stood up and got the microphone, and I thought, oh my gosh, what's he doing? And he gave a toast. He never would have had the confidence in himself to do that had he not been at Sterling Hall. And I really see how he's continued to grow into and come into his own over the years. And that would be the best story I have for what Sterling did to him in such a short period of time. They found my boy. They found him in there. Someone was just waiting to come along and turn the light switch on. And that's what they did.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that one. Okay. So what do the kids have to say about Sterling? So when they come home, what do they say about it? Because you two are very happy with Sterling. Do the boys like it as much? Beth Ann, let's start with you.
I have to say, I have older boys now, but it's what they don't say, because trust me, boys will tell you if they don't like something, they'll let you know, and they're not incredibly verbose. But if they don't like school, they'll let you know that they don't like school, and they'll let you know what they don't like. But I will say it's in their actions. Boys are very, they let you know by the fact that they get in the car in the morning to get to early morning breakfast club, and they don't even have a club. I'm like, what are you going to early morning for? I'm meeting my friends because we're preparing for a project. It's 7:30. Hurry up, Mom, get in the car. It's them that are driving us to get to school early. It's the fact that they sign up for an abundance of clubs, that they want to be on every team, that they want to show up for extra help, that they want to make connections with their teachers. To me, that speaks volumes, more than if they were sitting down on the couch for me and just blah, 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 I love school, because that's talk. This is action, right? Showing up, being present, wanting to be part of the community. It's what they're not saying. It's how they're showing up and how they're being present in their community. That to me tells me everything. My son, who is an alumnus now, he looks back at his time at SHS, and he knows that it has granted him incredible opportunities and opened up doors for him that he never would have had he not had the experience at SHS. And he knows not to take that for granted. And he really values his time there, and he talks about it often.
Thank you. That's great to hear. Nicole, how about your boys? I know they're younger.
Yeah, well, I actually had an opportunity to ask them, and it was quite funny because my older son in grade 3 said, Mom, shouldn't you be doing your work independently? How come you're asking me what I think about Sterling Hall? And I thought, you know what, this is great. You're really learning that your schoolwork is your own. So thank you, Sterling Hall, for that messaging. Apparently, Gabriel's gotten it. But I did ask them, and son number 1 in grade 2 said to me, it's a nice place and you don't have to be afraid because there are nice people that can help you. It's a very fun place with 4 recesses. And we did talk about the fact that that's pandemic. scheduling. But Rick, you might have some lobbying from some of the younger boys on that, so just be prepared. He does sit on student council, so I'm sure he'll pitch that idea later this year. And son number 2 said, Sterling is a place where you feel at home and where you have the most amazing teachers. You can find friends and you can always learn new things. So similar to what Beth Ann says, I mean, that was in their own words, but you know, I don't get any pushback to go to school. Never have, really. I have 2 boys who very much love their friends, love their teachers, enjoy everything about what the school offers. And so as a parent, I couldn't be happier.
Great. That's nice to hear. I like how you directly quoted from them. Thank you for sharing those words. That's fun. So if the school was to be represented as a single person, what would its personality be like in only 3 words? So this is not a very verbose question. Let's start with you, Nicole.
So, Susie, this was a tough question, I will say, because I had a long list of personality traits that I could describe Sterling by. I've narrowed it down to the 3, and I'll only use the 3, but I'm happy to elaborate if you let me. The first is passionate, the second is well-rounded, and the third is friendly.
Those are good.
I like those.
Do you want me to say more?
No, I think let's just leave it at that.
Okay.
And then let's let the parents, if they have questions about those, let's let them ask the questions, I think. I think it brings some curiosity and we can let the parents ask some questions. How about you, Beth Ann?
I had growth-minded, youthful, and committed.
Okay. So parents, if you've got some questions about where those words might come from or how they're represented, feel free to ask them in the chat and we'll get back to those. Okay, and then our last question for the parents. How would you describe the values of the school and the values of the families in the school community? Okay, Beth Ann?
I think I've pretty much covered it in all my answers, but just to recap, I would say that the parents, because I've talked a lot about the school, but the parents I would say are very much mirror the school in sharing philosophies and values, and that they're honest and fair and generous, both in their time and their commitment to volunteering and being part of the community. It's a wonderful place to be. So that's what I would say. Honest, fair, committed. That's how and friendly. Everyone's so friendly.
Oops. Great. And how about you, Nicole?
You know, Sterling has its core values that Rick alluded to earlier in his introduction. And I think what I would add to that, resilience and service. And when I speak of resilience, I think of the fact that Sterling really advocates the boys being confident to overcome obstacles. You know, Beth Ann mentioned that making mistakes isn't discouraged at Sterling. It's an opportunity to learn and grow. And I think in this pandemic year, if it's anything we've learned, the value of resilience is so important. And the fact that Sterling embodies that in every possible way is just testament to how great, you know, the community is. My second value of service, what I'm meaning there is really service to others. So I'll quote you, Rick. You often say to the boys, big boys look out for themselves, but bigger boys look out for each other. And I think that that's a very strong value that Sterling Hall shares with the boys. The idea of helping others is a fundamental importance. They're encouraged to show their courage to advocate for other boys and other people in the community. And so I would say that that's a very strong value and one that as a parent, I obviously can get behind. Do you want us to move on to the values of families or? Oh, sorry, Susie.
Yes, please do.
So I think for values that represent the parent community, resilience and service are in there, but I would also add commitment or devotion. I think at Sterling, you've got a group of parents that are not just about picking up and dropping off their son from school. I actually think Sterling's well known in the greater community as the type of school where parents mingle in the halls, they speak to teachers and staff daily. It's a very welcoming community. And I think the kinds of parents that end up at Sterling are the kinds of parents that are really committed to their son's education. I think you have packed assemblies with parents involved, special days, spirit days, cheering on your son at the soccer field. You just always see parents present and committed. And I think that really speaks volumes to the kind of community that we have. The other value I'd say that's strong in our parent community is generosity. I think it's fair to say that all of us as parents, as Sterling parents, we want to instill that sort of value in our boys of being philanthropic. So you will always see parents supporting those initiatives. We've also got a strong parents association, and I think both Beth Ann and I have seen it firsthand that we have no shortage of volunteers at Sterling. Parents want to be involved, parents want to give their time to any sort of cause that helps the community. Our small community at Sterling, but also the larger community that we live in. So I'd say those are probably two strong values I see in our parent community.
I would say too, Nicole, it's something that I've heard echoed through the parent community, that's something we're all missing during this pandemic time. We're all craving that connection that we've built over the years and we've fostered so carefully and nurtured. We're missing our time in the schoolyard. We're missing our time in the hallways because it is such an integral part of our community and our time together. It's something that we're all, I think, reflecting and realizing just how special and how precious it is. When it's taken away from you, you realize how much you miss it.
I was actually speaking to one of the teachers last week who's been at the school for 15 years. And I said, so what do you think makes this place so special? And he also said the community. And he said, one thing that makes us stand out so differently from other schools is we love having the parents come in and drop their kids off in the morning and pick them up. And we actually love the parent door chats when they're coming to drop off their kids. Whereas that's very rare at schools. Most schools, it's drop your kid off, the teachers are busy. Whereas at our school, we're not too busy. We want to hear, just so you know, pet turtle died this morning. So somebody's not going to have a great day today. That's important to us because it's a part of the community and we need to help them develop their character with that. There's empathy there. And so all of that is, building the whole person. It's part of the whole child. And it really makes for the school. It's very different in that way. So Nicole, did you want to add something?
Susie, no, I think that's everything. I think between Beth Ann and I, we've covered it. We're like-minded, so
yeah, that's
a lot
great.
of the same benefits.
Okay, well, thank you so much. So parents, if you've got any questions for Beth Ann or Nicole, feel free to add them in the chat. And I think we're going to move on to our alumnus, Sydney, who is in grade 10 at SAC. Are you ready, Sydney?
Yes, I am ready.
You have been very patient. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Okay. So Sydney joined us in grade 7. So just keep that in mind. So what did you appreciate most about the school during your time? And how has your perspective on that changed now that you've been away from the school for a little bit?
Well, something that I really loved about Sterling was trying new things. And because that was something back in my older schools that I never got a reason to do. There were all these teams and whatever. That's great, but no one gave me a reason to actually join them. And that's something that Sterling did totally different for me. They gave me a reason to try stuff that I never thought I wanted to do or thought I could do. And because of that, I really enjoyed it. And it really made Sterling a memorable place for me. And now that I'm in St. Andrews, the same thing sort of applies here, just on another scale since it's in high school. And given the fact that Sterling has definitely opened my mind up to a lot more wider opportunities, seeking other things and taking as much as I can from an area that provides a lot of opportunities is something that's just been engraved in my mindset. So, yeah.
That's great. I love the fact that you're continuing to jump on all those opportunities. I know you certainly did while you were at Sterling. So what, according to you, most differentiates Sterling from other schools?
I think the teachers separate Sterling from a lot of other schools, and mainly it's because a lot of teachers back in my older schools, while they were there to help me, they wouldn't like, they would do it out of me needing to ask them. And like, they would only show up if you ask them to show up. And usually they'd only do it in certain times. Whereas the teachers in Sterling were always welcoming. They were always extremely open people. You could talk to them whenever you needed to. And there were literal times and periods where we all just sit in a class and just talk about random things that we like to talk about, or just problems that we seek improvement on. And I just think that in a community where there are adults that are willing to listen to children, whereas in this society, a lot of adults don't like to listen to children because they're younger, it has me respect a lot of the teachers greatly at that school.
So are you still in touch with any of your teachers?
Yes, I am. I am in touch with Miss Gray and Miss Turnick.
Awesome, that's great. So just like I asked the parents, if you had to represent the school as a single person, what personality would you give it in only 3 words?
So my 3 words are daring, risk-taking, and adventurous, because Sterling, while I was there, for at least the 2 years that I was there, did things that, at least for me, that I never would have done, knowing that I would have possibly failed in it. And that was something that I was scared of, and that's something that like was engraved in my mindset back then, that if you fail and you're bad at something, and you should be disappointed in yourself for that. And going to Sterling has shown me that it's just an opportunity to learn even more. And doing that and them taking me on multiple adventurous opportunities and multiple different types of adventurous things, where obviously I failed at some points, but I still got up and continued learning. It was very memorable to me, and I can now have a lot of memories that I can share with a lot of other people, being like, yeah, this place is a great place because they do so much for you.
This question isn't there, but I'm just interested. What was the most risk-taking thing you did while you were there?
Rugby, joining the rugby team, because unlike a lot of other sporty people, I don't necessarily have a particular liking to sports. And another thing, I just don't like being touched necessarily, or for competitive or anything. And so I was really nervous into going into trying it out, but still decided to do it anyways. And I had fun.
Well done. That sounds great. Good for you. So what would be one thing you would change about the school for the better if you had to choose something?
I'd say freedom privileges. I'm not sure what the freedom privileges are now that I've been away for about 2 years, but I believe one thing and one fact that a lot of people, especially adults, need to know is that at some point, that child will be unrestrained and be thrown into the real world. When they're given all of these different types, when they're given all of that freedom and that entire privilege, but they're giving it for like a very short amount of time, it can be confusing when they first become adults, and they could do, and it can just, I don't really know how to explain it, but it can just it could confuse you, and it could lead you to make wrong decisions. And so I believe that with a sense of freedom at a younger age, you develop a bigger sense of responsibility. So when you go out in the real world, you actually know what to do and what not to do, and the risks of what you can and cannot do.
Okay. So what would families find most surprising about the school?
I would think it's events, and also it's rules regarding joining sports, because at least from my perspective, in my old school, all of the sports that I participated in, or like all the sports that you could participate in, you were not forced to, or you were not told to do so. They were just saying, oh yeah, here's the basketball team, here's the soccer team, you can join them if you want. That, at least personally, wasn't enough to get me motivated to actually go and do something. But at least in Sterling, like for example, Mr. Allen, he got me to join the rugby team because he was like, oh, well, you need to do like a sport for this term. So I was like, all right, then yeah, definitely. I'll try out the rugby team. Sounds fun. And I just think without a motivation like that, I would have never done it in the first place. And in regards to the events, I forget the name, but there was this one sporting event near the end of the year, I believe, where you do a bunch of activities. And then after that, there was like this run where you had to run around a field. I participated in that solely because it just sounded like something fun to me. It gave me a motivation to actually do so. And that is something that I never really experienced in the past, and something that I don't believe my parents either have experienced in the past. So I thought it was very surprising to me when I first got into Sterling.
Was that our Olympics?
I believe so, yeah.
And then did
So
you do the Crawford Mile?
No, I didn't get to do Crawford.
So it sounds like there was a lot of energy and motivation from the teachers to encourage students to engage in the events.
Yes.
So you were never left to your own devices to say, no, I don't feel like doing anything. There were always
Exactly.
people around who were excited about what was going on at the school. So you couldn't just do nothing. There was always
Yeah.
people saying, let's go, let's go, let's go. And so you wanted to get involved. Is that right?
Yeah, that's perfectly right. That's how it always was.
So it was the energy and the positive is a little bit contagious at the school, maybe.
Exactly. Yes. There are times where I didn't want to do a lot of things, or I would be like, I don't really feel like it. But other people, when you have like other people influencing you a lot, it grows on you, and you just are like, all right, then I'll do it, and you do.
Okay. So what advice would you give to students entering the school?
My only advice is try as much as you can, even if you don't think you're good at it, because when opportunities are given to you, and even though you think you're not ready for it, you should still try and take it, because you don't know if it's going to unlock something, if it's going to unlock some random talent that you never knew you had until you get there. Because closing yourself off of opportunities, or limiting yourself, you cannot expect to exceed your limits, because you're not even meeting them in the first place. So when you go out and branch out and become like this tree of infinite opportunities and possibilities, then you'll actually get to see the full version of yourself and who you were born to be. So my advice would be to try as much as you can, even though you think you're not good at it.
Okay, great. So that brings us to the end of our questions, but we do have some in the chat for both parents and for you, Sydney, as well. So please feel free to add other questions to the chat. So Sydney, I've got a question for you to start with. Since you joined in grade 7, and it's just the last 2 years, what challenges did you face coming in when some of the boys had been there already for maybe 8 years, and you were only there for 2 years? So was it challenging to join the community and belong, is the first part of the question. And the second is, did you get a lot out of it in just 2 years?
So to answer the first question, I would think yes, because primarily I am an introvert. When I go and meet new people, or I go and meet new things, my default mode is just introvert mode. So when I had to join an entirely new school with people that had years of like experience with each other, and just had like this entire bond, and everyone was already in the friend groups, I was confused. I didn't know who to choose or what to choose. So it was hard for me to try and fit in, but eventually, just thanks to the atmosphere in Sterling, I was able to do it in about like 3 weeks. And when it came to getting stuff out of it in 2 years, I believe I have, and even my mother has. She's saying that my mindset has been completely different the whole time, and I do agree with that as well, because I always was just one-track minded, thinking of stuff that only I wanted to do, instead of stuff that I wasn't sure if I wanted to do, but still did it anyway. And I would always limit myself in the past, but now I don't do that anymore, because I know that now if I do that, I'll never be able to see the full extent of myself. So I believe that Sterling did teach me that, and it's changed my entire life forever. So yeah.
Okay, great. There are a few things that we put into place in grades 7 and 8, in grades 6, 7, and 8 to help the boys. So in grades 6, 7, 8, they join an advisory group, and that has boys that are in grades 6, 7, and 8 in it. And they have a teacher, an advisory teacher that they meet with. They're also in a homeroom, which is a small group, and they meet with them. And those groups meet in community circles every day or every other day. And that's when they work on much of the VIA character development and the social emotional learning program. All the students in grade 8 also have a mentor, a faculty mentor, that they meet with every week for half an hour. So those students also have a connection there. So there are many different ways that the faculty help to support students in the intermediate years. Okay, so we have another question. What is done specifically differently at Sterling for boys? So if I'm coming from a co-ed school, what will I see or hear done specifically differently for boys? So who would like to give any information on this? I'm quite happy to help out, but from a parent or student perspective, is there anything that you can think of done in the classroom or Sydney by teachers that you know that's specifically done for boys that would be different than a co-ed school?
So I think I can provide some color to that.
Okay, thanks, Nicole.
I would say that Sterling really understands different types of boys. So I have 2 boys at the school, and I definitely think that they were able to cater to each one in different ways in terms of how they learn. But I will never forget my son's grade 1 class with a fantastic teacher, probably one of my favorites. And we got to the parent-teacher interview, and I said, oh, you know, every boy had a name tag on the seat. And I'm like, you know, where's my son's name? I don't see it. And he pointed to the wall. And there, sure enough, was my son's name that had been taped up to the wall. And he said, you know, your son sometimes needs to be able to stand up. It helps him to focus. It helps him to learn. And I thought just the idea that that teacher was able to understand my son so early on and accommodate him. And sure enough, the next time we went into the class, you know, my son had his name tag on a chair, and it wasn't because he was misbehaving. He's actually a very strong academic learner, but I just think he needed a little bit of an outlet, and that teacher very much understood him. And you know, he doesn't have his name on the wall anymore, but I like the fact that there was a teacher who was, you know, kind of willing to really understand my boy and how he would learn. And again, it had nothing to do with the academic side of things, because this happens to be my boy who's quite strong and needs enrichment, if anything else. But I just like the idea that there was creativity and outside of the box thinking. And I don't know that you could see that in every school environment. So I thought that might be a nice story to help parents see that there's a lot of creativity in the learning that you'll see, and different ways to reach boys that Sterling excels at.
Okay. Any other examples?
So Susie, I can speak to some of the projects that some of the boys have done in the later years. For example, blowing up rocket ships. I know that that's a fan favorite, and the boys can't wait until they get to that science lesson. It's very exciting. Paper airplanes, the aerodynamics of them. Those are exciting ones. Some of the literature books that they choose tend to be focused on subjects that boys tend to be a little bit more interested in. Again, I have 3 boys who are very different learners, have very different interests, very different passions. But what I think Sterling's strength is being able to pivot to different types of boys and being able to tap into them. For example, I just heard a mom the other day tell me that her kindergarten son had just started and had moved from a co-ed school, and she couldn't believe it because they were learning letters and spelling words, and instead of just reciting the letters verbally, the kindergarten teacher had the boys up and doing actions with them, like karate chops or jumping jacks, and just adding some of that movement. She said her son was so engaged, and all of a sudden it was an exciting activity and it wasn't just rote. Those would be some things just off the top of my head. And I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the presentation, the physical learning space, being able to get up and move, having headphones if there's noise going on around you. Some boys love to have the ability to block out the extra noise that's around them. The wiggle chairs, the wiggle mats, the ability to lie down on the floor if you work better that way. You're not necessarily seeing all of these as the boys go into grade 8. Some of them have worked out their kinks and idiosyncrasies by the time they get to grade 8. But when they're little and in grade 1 and grade 2, and they're still learning how to control their jitters and their wiggle bums, it's great that they're able to do that and still stay in the learning environment and not be in an environment where the teacher sees it as disruptive and then they're asked to leave, because that isn't learning. That's being told you have to leave. So I love that about Sterling.
And Beth Ann, I'll add that because the teachers are able to provide these outlets to the boys, when it comes time to have to sit down at the Friday assembly, you'll be amazed at how nicely, right from JK all the way up to grade 8, that the boys are sitting and able to focus, respect the adults who are speaking or their peers. And I think it's a fine balance. It's understanding, where the boys need their outlets, but also helping them to understand when they need to focus, when there's discipline that's required. And it's just such a fine balance. And I think Sterling really does a good job of kind of allowing both those opportunities to take place within the same setting.
My oldest son, when he was in grade 8, had a wonderful science teacher who one of his whole philosophies was keep asking questions. Where does it lead you? Ask the question. And it's amazing when the boys ask questions and they're allowed to follow that curiosity where it takes them, because now it's boy-centric learning and it's actually individual learning. And I always enjoyed the trip, like just seeing where his own thoughts were taking him and having that teacher push him even further. Like, keep going with it, keep going, you're not done yet. Keep pushing your own learning and your own curiosity. And that's another great example of not staying inside the box, not staying within a framework, or because it's on a piece of paper, we have to stick with it. So those are a few examples.
Yeah, that's great. I can just add also, the boys' brains are quite different. And teachers know that. And boys are more visual and spatial. And when they're younger, they're stronger that way. So it's easier to start with the math. And boys are usually quicker to pick up math in the younger years. And so the school will start, we can do the math a little bit faster. And so our math is more academically rigorous. And so by the time the boys finish grade 8, they're actually done the grade 9 Ontario math. But boys struggle more with literacy. It just takes longer for their brain to pick it up. So they need more support with that. And often you find in a co-ed school, they lack confidence in their literacy skills and they're lagging behind the girls. And so being in an all boys school, we can provide support, we can provide structure, we can provide the scaffolding they need for the reading, the writing. We can push that earlier so that they don't lack confidence. We can also develop that confidence in the public speaking, which we heard from Beth Ann about, and make that difference there. And we know that boys are far more kinesthetic, so they need a lot more movement, as again we heard with the formation of the letters and the movement. We can also teach the executive functioning skills, which have to do with time management, organization, all those things that we get so frustrated with our boys, like, why don't you have your stuff? Why didn't you break this down? Why is this late? Those skills need to be taught to boys, and they can learn them, but we need to start teaching them at a very young age. And that's something that our teachers do. And we don't just expect them to know how to do it. We actually break down those skills and teach them to our boys. And often that doesn't happen in a co-ed school because, you know, many girls naturally will do it. Their brain is more set up for it. And so the boys get forgotten. And so we actually take the time to teach it. And those are all important parts of what we do in our boys' school in K-8. So those are those are some other elements, just a few of them. There are a whole bunch more, but those are a few important ones that we like.
Sorry, Susan,
I have another. Oh,
can I just
go
add
ahead.
one thing that I found really great for the older boys in grades 7 and 8 in particular? When they're in a safe space to be able to explore feelings in literacy, in particular, is coming to mind. When they're able to be empathetic with characters in a novel or see themselves that way or explore their feelings, it's a lot easier to do that when you're in a room full of your like-minded peers, in particular other boys, than if you're doing it with another 13-year-old girl in the room. And I see that with my own boys. They were able to let their guards down a little bit and just be themselves, and their peer group were able to come together that way. And I think because of that, they were able to push their literacy much, much further and be able to grow as learners without having the intimidation factor of having these very verbal girls there in the room, and or their own, possibly they're being intimidated for other reasons because they're 13-year-old boys and there was 13-year-old girls in the room. So,
But then that's a good point. I was going to touch on that as well. I think the vulnerability piece is important. And I think when they're around boys, they probably take opportunities that they might not otherwise take. In the younger years, you know, even I've passed by dance classes and the boys are, you know, putting out their best moves. And I'll tell you that my boys won't do that outside of the school necessarily. Maybe one would, the other not so much. He'd clam right up and he wouldn't dare get on a dance floor. And, you know, I've seen him doing all sorts of, you know, things in the background in his dance class. And it was, you know, just so nice to watch. And even choir. You know, both my boys did choir, and I've got one boy who won't sing outside of the school. He'll perform winter concerts and assemblies, and he'll, you know, sing with Miss Dale, but to get him to, you know, do a little karaoke or sing outside, it won't happen. So it's kind of nice to see those, you know, the boys take chances, and I think they do that because they feel comfortable.
yeah, the risk taking.
Sydney, I have a question for you from a parent. What difference did Sterling Hall make for you compared to having, if you entered SAC at grade 7 directly?
Sorry, repeat the question again.
So what difference did it make that you went to Sterling Hall for grades 7 and 8 instead of having gone directly to SAC in grade 7?
I think if I went to SAC instead from grade 7 all the way to where I am now, compared to Sterling, not much would change except for just the people that I know and the connections that I'd have. Because going to Sterling really gave me a reason to like have friends and stuff like that. Like it showed me the benefit of actually being with other people. And I believe both schools could bring out the exact same opportunity, just Sterling would have given me more connections than SAC would have, because Sterling is at an entirely other school with all these other people, and SAC is this other school with all these other people. Staying in one of those schools, except for going to both of them, would limit the other. So I think that possibly like the only difference, but other than that, not much.
Okay, we also have a question from Spike Lee. Are you still here? Do you want to ask your question, Spike?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, let me just say that this has been a great session. I think the elements that you guys touched on really helpful, and the stories that you guys related to, and Sydney in particular. I mean, with the clarity with which you speak, I just really admire that at such a young age. Well done. I do have a question. So I think as parents. My wife and I care a lot about character and competence in our young boy, and he's only a year old, so we're thinking ahead of time. And you guys touched on the character piece really a lot today, which is fantastic. For the competence piece, we in particular want our son to have that kind of intellectual curiosity. So Beth Ann mentioned that just a moment ago. I was wondering if you can relate any stories, so including you, Sydney, your own experience, or Beth Ann and Nicole, your son's experience, where you could just see your son is really intellectually curious because of the things that they experienced at school. Any story that you can tell that shows us this intellectual curiosity element in your son's life?
Cool.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. It is a good one. I can give one example of my younger son. My eldest loves to read, walks around everywhere with a book. So I don't think I can take credit for that. I think he came out of the womb that way. But my younger guy, it wasn't something that came naturally to him. And I think what the school did amazingly is to get him interested in reading books. They really focused on topics that would inspire and interest him. And from there, it was just such a nice natural flow. Now, of course, he was a young reader at the time, but I think, between the librarian, between his teachers in kindergarten and in grade 1, they were really able to get him interested in books. And, today he's in grade 2, and he has books that he wants to read at night. He's got interests, and it was not a natural process, but I think it's something that Sterling very much helped him with. They have a great guided reading program in the younger years that I really give a lot of credit to that for helping kind of pique his interest in books. So I could say from the younger years, I see, with the academic side of things, growth in that respect.
That's great to know.
I just want to say we have reached the end of our time. However, there are still some more questions. So we're happy to stay on and answer more questions, but I know some of you need to run. So I want to say thank you so much for coming. And if you have other larger questions, you're more than welcome to organize a personalized information session with me. You can book that online. We're looking forward to seeing most of you at our open house next week, one of our open houses. If you have any feedback for us, that would be most welcome. And I want to say thank you so much to Nicole and Sydney and Beth Ann for being with us today. And thank you for your questions and for joining us all. So if you want to stay and ask more questions, you are more than welcome. You're welcome to turn on your cameras and join us. I know we haven't gotten to all the questions in the chat yet, but feel free. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, so we still have some questions.
Would it be all right if I head out? Because I have a leadership thing.
Yes, thank you so much, Sydney.
Thank you very
Take
much.
care. We'll be in touch.
Bye, Sydney.
Somebody was asking, Jen, are you still here? Jen Alvo. Jen Alvo, no, I will email her. Okay. Sarah still here? Sarah Goldstein. She was asking, what classes do the kids enjoy most? And from the mom's opinions, What subjects do you feel are strongest at Sterling?
I can tell you, so I have 3 very different boys, very different learners, and they obviously have different loves. So my middle one loves the science program. He's all about that. It's a very hands-on, when you get into the later years, especially with really unique experiments that are a lot of fun. The teacher has them outside a lot. That's great. My youngest one lives and dies for gym. I won't lie. He's just, if he can be outside all day, he can be outside. I know that's not the answer you were looking for, but it's gym. I'll be honest. My older one, I would say when he got into the grade 7 and 8 program, it was hands down, it blew me away. It blew me away, the 7 and 8 program. And I would advocate it to the end, that it changed him, because those years between grade 7 and 8, he changed so much. And those teachers were phenomenal. All the teachers at Sterling have been amazing, but in particular in grade 7 and 8, they pushed those boys to be the best that they could be. So my oldest was not a reader, didn't like reading, couldn't get him to read anything. In grade 7, they were expected to read several books on their own and do several book reports. And I don't know how Miss Lang did it, but she tapped into him and got him reading and got him to love reading. And he got hooked. And I don't know how she did it. I'd love to know her magic, because I won a sprinklet on my other boys. And then he went into humanities class, and humanities is so rich because you're tying in literature with what's happening in the current world, what's happening with the state of the world and the boys' place in the world, and how they can be civic minded with it. So Jack, for sure, my oldest, would say humanities. And then there was a drama component with it. And that encouraged him when he went to UCC to continue to take English and drama, which is something that if you had asked me in grade 6 or grade 5, never would have said he would have done that. It is amazing. The grade 7 and 8 program pushes them into a whole new level to try things that they never would have done before.
And I can just add to that. I would say, for my sons, my eldest loves social studies, and I think the teachers have done a really good job of that. So, you know, if they're talking about, you know, early settlers or pioneers, or what it, you know, feels like to live in different parts of Canada. I mean, you've got a teacher who, I think she brought her sister onto a Zoom call, who lives in the Yukon, so that the boys could ask her questions. And I love the way the teachers are connecting, you know, taking the learning, kind of like the academics, but how do you apply it, and what can you bring in from the outside to make it that much more interesting. I'd say we also had a great experience last year, where the teacher would actually take a science concept, and then he'd embed it into the math problem solving and into the literacy. And so there you had learning that was kind of really entering the various subjects, and the boys could see the connections, which was really nice to kind of have it really hit home. My younger guy probably loves gym too. If you were to ask him, I think he would put his hand up for that. But it's also not just because they're moving, but they actually take them through a lot of different areas of physical fitness. It's not just about, you know, running around aimlessly. My younger son can do a really mean push-up. I'm quite impressed, and I'll give credit to, you know, Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Davis, all those great phys ed teachers that have really taught the boys great form. I mean, their squats and lunges are enviable, really. So I would say that whatever subject Sterling gets into, they do it really well. And I think it really inspires the boys, maybe even in a subject that they're not so keen on, because it might not, you know, come easy to them. They're able to like it. So in French, you can do a French rap, and, you know, that gets the boys singing along. And so it's really just that creativity that I kind of alluded to before, that I think it's so key in the learning at Sterling.
I would say, I think Sterling, what the other part of that question was what subject I think that they excel at. I would say for me, when I went into the building, and unfortunately for parents who don't have that opportunity right now, I was blown away with the art space. It's beautiful, it's airy, it's light. it's bright. And those two art teachers, Miss Turnick and Miss Legacy, they're committed to their craft, both of teaching and art. And it's quite something, their commitment to teaching the boys, because they see that not everybody has that intrinsic artist inside of them, but they get the boys and they hook them in teaching them the concepts. It's not crafts, and they're not marked on how beautiful their art is. They're marked on their learning the concepts, and they learn about artists. So I remember they learned about Van Gogh, and it wasn't just about the painting. So there's a historical element too. And then my boys were quite keen when they saw that the Van Gogh exhibit came to Toronto. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've been waiting my whole life for this, for my boys to actually be interested in something cultural. And it was exciting for me that they had this reference point and they were keen. And I attribute all of that to Miss Turnick and Miss Legacy. It's my favorite course at the school, because their passion just shines through. They can look at a square that your son has done and be like, look at how talented he is. I'm like, I don't think so.
Beth Ann, that's such a good point about the art curriculum, because I would say even as young as grade 1, you know, my son came home with you know, his face, a mustache drawn, and I'm like, you know, Gabriel, what is that? He's like, I'm Salvador Dali, Mom. And I thought, you know, I'm so impressed that my boys can name artists and they know, you know, famous art pieces. And it's to your point, it's not just about drawing and painting. You know, Miss Turnick takes them through art history and learning, you know, famous artists. And yes, I got the same question about the Van Gogh exhibit and why we haven't gone. So kudos to Miss Turnick, because she's doing a fantastic job. It's all her.
Yeah.
I agree. My son's just joined the school in grade 8, and Miss Legacy keeps coming to me in the hall and she says, Ryder's just such a fabulous artist, and I love how he's doing this and this, and she knows him already and she just thinks he's so great at art. And I'm kind of like, okay, I guess I better look for it.
So better pay attention.
You know, she just makes them feel so positive, which is motivating for them, because then they want to do more and more of it. And he's just inspired now to do more art. So I love that positive element. Another question, which I will just answer for Kevin Lowe. Typical student profile that we are looking to recruit. Good question. We don't actually have a typical profile we look to recruit because we want to help boys become the best version of themselves. And so we are looking for families and boys that that resemble our values of learning, character, and community. So we are looking at the boy and the family. We are looking for boys that are interested in learning and growing and becoming the best version of themselves. So it's not necessarily about, do they know a whole set of skills already in math and literacy. We're more interested, when I'm looking at them, how they learn. Are they interested in learning? Do they have a potential for persevering? Do they have a growth mindset, or has something happened and they have the potential for a growth mindset? Do they look like they will benefit from our program? So if we think that, you know, this is a kid who will change after a few weeks here, it's not, we don't want kids that are already all molded necessarily, because then they don't need our program necessarily. So we don't have a mold already. We take each child as they are, and sometimes we look at them and we say, you know, not ready, one more year, let's keep working at it. So we don't have a typical profile, nor do we have a graduate profile, because, you know, if they come in as a seed, then we want a wild flower garden at the end. Because when they leave us in grade 8, they go to 15 plus different schools. So we've got, great artists or great math science people, or people who want to go to, very academic schools or outdoor ed schools. So there isn't one kind of profile at the end, except that they've become and figured themselves out so that we can help place them into the best high school that they want to go to. So I'm not sure if that helps with your question. Okay, next question. And it goes back to another one. We've obviously got some potential intermediate candidates here. So a similar question, and this is for you, Beth Ann. What's the benefit of going to Sterling for grades 7 and 8 instead of going straight to UCC, for example, in grade 7? Why not put my kids straight into UCC when I have a through school instead of going to Sterling for 7-8 when I then have to apply again?
I think that's a great question. And I feel really comfortable answering it. First, I would say that at UCC, your son most likely, I can't say with an authority, but most likely won't have the leadership opportunities that he will have at Sterling Hall for 7 and 8. I think that the leadership opportunities that the boys have at Sterling for 7 and 8 are unparalleled, and those will just prepare him for the UCC experience. I will say I don't think that Jack was ready for UCC in grade 7. UCC grade 9 is very different than UCC grade 7. It's a whole different kettle of fish. I will also say that the experiences that the intermediate boys at Sterling have are quite unique. They get to go on that trip to Temagami, which is very enriching for the boys. They have essentially a bit of an odyssey where they go up north and it's them against the wilderness. And as a parent, it sounds like a little, you're not really sure what to expect, but the boys come back and they glean so much from that time away because they are now expected to survive out there. And they're tested. Their mettle is tested physically and emotionally. They're tested. And then that translates into the rest of their grade 8 year. And they draw on that experience quite a lot. Jack used that when he applied to the various high schools, and they asked him quite a lot about it, especially at UCC and the other high schools that he applied. They know that Sterling does that trip. They are very familiar with the intermediate years at Sterling Hall. So I would say that it served him well to have those experiences under his belt, the leadership experiences, the trip experience, as well as the academic experience. He was a far stronger writer, having gone through grade 7 and 8. He had the SSAT experience as well, which was great for him. Just the opportunity to write a standardized test and experience a little bit of that pressure. Going through the grade 7 and 8 program at Sterling, his math definitely bolstered as well. He went into UCC and he's doing fine. Whereas some of the boys who come from other schools, they're struggling because UCC moves at quite a quick clip that Sterling Hall is very familiar with. Sterling Hall places boys at UCC often for grade 9. So they're very comfortable making that transition. It's a very smooth transition. That's how I would feel about it. I think that the experience that Jack got in grade 7 and 8 has made him a more confident boy, a stronger academic candidate, as well as I think he had the opportunity to be a big fish for a little while. Go right into UCC, you're with boys in grade 12, they're 17, 18 years old. Having an opportunity at Sterling to be the big fish in the small pond, that's unique. You're not gonna have that probably ever again once you're in high school, not until you're in grade 12, and then they're off to university. So I wasn't in such a rush for Jack to grow up.
Beth Ann, that's a very good point you bring up. I mean, my boys are younger, but I can tell you how much they look up to the grade 8 boys, to the grade 7 and 8 boys. And the grade 7 and 8 boys have a lot of opportunities to bond with the younger kids, which I think is so important for their learning and for their growth. So even just, they set up buddies. So, you know, grade 8s have younger buddies that they get to mentor and have time with. And I think because we're that smaller school and it's K to 8, you get a lot of those opportunities that I just don't know if that translates in other larger environments. So I do see a lot of, I would go as far as to say they idolize those older boys. And I think that does a lot for the older boys' confidence, I'm sure. And it's really cute to watch the relationship between the grade 8s and the younger boys, you know, the high fives in the hallways as they're walking by. And I'm always asking my sons, I'm like, how do you know that boy? He's like, oh, that's so-and-so, Mom. Come on, how do you not know? And so I really think that interaction that happens is so key. And I don't know, again,
and it gives them an opportunity to be a mentor, right? It's not just being a reading buddy. It's much more than that. It's a mentorship program where they're the mentor as opposed to the mentee. And Susie, you touched on it as well, that the boys in grade 7 and 8, actually grade 6, 7, and 8, have the opportunity at Sterling to have that mentor program. And I will say, the school that Jack thought he wanted to go to in grade 7 is not UCC. And he was ride or die for that school in grade 7. And he changed so much in grade 7 and 8 that I can't imagine him anywhere but UCC. But in grade 6 and 7, if you had asked me where he was going to go, I would have told you a very different school. And I can't imagine him at that school now. I don't think it would be the right fit at all. And partly because Elizabeth Gray, the grade 8 advisor who helps the boys transition to their next school, she really opened my eyes to the type of boy my son had become. There's a lot of growth between grade 7 and 8. So if you put your son at a school that goes all the way to grade 12, you're not really allowing him the opportunity to grow and become who he's meant to be. Like maybe he's meant to be at an outdoor ed school. Maybe he's meant to be at a very technical school or a very academic school. But the school that Jack had in mind and that we thought he would go to in grade 6 is definitely not UCC. And now I can't imagine him anywhere but there. So I hope that answers your question.
I'll just add too that there's one more leadership opportunity in grade 8 that they have. Because our school is small and there's only 36 kids in grade 8, they're all on a leadership team. So for example, my son is on an agent of change. And so he's in charge of the community and the service. And every student that is in grade 8 is on a leadership team that they apply for and they're placed on. And then the faculty, they have a faculty member that helps lead. So it can be athletics, academics, art and music, media. And throughout the year, they are responsible for leadership and they put together a portfolio, which then they use for applying to their high schools. And it literally is like a grade 12 kind of prefect leadership position in the school. And they don't have that opportunity to do that anywhere else. And part of it is because we're a smaller school. And like Beth Ann said, they're the big fish. You know, in grade 7, they get to help coach a lot of the sports. They can also do it in grade 8, but it's mostly the grade 7s that do that. You know, they play a larger role in the student council when they're in grade 7 and 8. So all of those things help them with their confidence, with their public speaking skills. And it makes a difference whether you're, you know, the leaders of the school or you're the bottom of the pack at a school. And so that's kind of what we pride ourselves on, is that and the element of figuring out who you are and your identity. I know with my 2 boys, they changed significantly in 7 and 8. And the same thing is they're in different schools than they would be in grade 6 as well. They completely changed.
Susie, I'm sorry. I am actually going to have to say goodbye to this round table. I've enjoyed myself, but I'm just looking at the time and I've got to get running. I hope you don't mind.
And actually we're at the end of our questions. So we'll bring this session to a close. So thank you so much, everybody. I hope to see you all next week at our open house. And thank you so much, Beth Ann and Nicole, for all your help and your insight and perspectives. And yeah, it was great. I really appreciate it.